Everybody, I'm so glad to have you here. I think we're going to have people trickling in. We had a huge RSVP for this event, and as you know, who have been here before, our Pennoni panels tend to be popular. So this is another in a long line. Anyway, I'm Paula Morantz-Cohen. I'm the Dean of the Pennoni Honors College, and we have spearheaded these. I was talking to my team, Erica Zellinger, who's the Director of Marketing and Media, and Ann Alexander and Melinda Lewis are behind these panels, and I think this is the 10th. Well, she said it was the 10th. I think it's like the 12th. But we've had many of these panels now, and they have become, I think, a lot of you may have been to others. Our idea is to deal with important and controversial issues in a probing and civil way. Hopefully, eventually, these panels will come under the umbrella of a Center for Civil Discourse that I would like to have as part of the Pennoni Honors College. So if you have an interest or thoughts about this idea, please email me or come to me or my staff and we can talk about it, because I'd love to hear what you have to say. We like to explain that the mission of the Pennoni Honors College is to create enrichment of different kinds and on many levels for Drexel students and faculty. So even though the honors program, which admits students, is a part of the Honors College, we have lots of other activities, programming, and coursework that is available to all students at the university, as well as programs that are for everyone, like staff and faculty as well. So, let's see. I just want to quickly tell you, because we have students here, some of the things that we offer in Pennoni that might be of interest to you. We have a Office of Undergraduate Research. If you're interested in doing research as an undergraduate in someone's lab or working with a professor, if you visit our undergraduate research office, they will help you with that, maybe pair you with a professor, and support you if it looks like you're serious about that kind of work. We have a Scholar Development and Fellowship Office, which will help you cultivate yourself for a fellowship opportunity. And we've been very successful with our fellowships, both small and large. We've had a record number last year of Fulbright Awards throughout the world. So please, if you're undergraduates, and especially if you're early in your undergraduate career, we advise you to go to our fellowships office, because we want to get you into the pipeline early. So even if you know people, some of you are staff, I know, and faculty, send your promising students to fellowships and see if they, are interested in trying to go abroad or get support for a project of some sort. Our symposium courses are theme-based interdisciplinary courses open to all students. And we really encourage you, either students or faculty, to have your students look into them. This year, every year there's a theme. This year the theme is fashion, which is an interesting complement to our body image panel today. So all different aspects of fashion, from the consumer aspect to the issue of production, to aesthetic issues associated with fashion, to body and fashion. So I think this will be really interesting. So, and I also want to urge you to keep an eye out for our next panel, where the topic is still pending. It will be on November 15th, but as soon as we know, we will get the word out. But from our experience, we tend to come up with topics that people are interested in. So without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to our moderator, Dr. Joy Cox, and she will introduce our panelists and start the ball rolling. Joy.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
It is a pleasure to be here. I'm excited to be here to talk and hear from you all, as well as hear from our panelists. As I was introduced, my name is Dr. Joy Cox. I'm actually from Rutgers University in Newark, New Jersey. So I rushed here this afternoon so that I could moderate this panel, to make sure that I was here, and it is an honor to be asked to kind of moderate the conversation. No, it's okay. They very rarely do I ever get a microphone lowered. It's just not something that happens. I'll try to speak up though. Just a little bit about myself. So if you're wondering why am I moderating this panel, I recently finished with my PhD in March, and I actually researched and looked at issues of identity management, issues of stigma, and how it relates to people who live in larger size bodies. And so to kind of bring a certain wealth of knowledge to the topic, that's why I'm here today, referred by one of my colleagues, Janelle, who serves here at Drexel. Okay, and so enough about me. Let's get into today's panelists. I'm going to go ahead and introduce them briefly, and then we'll just go ahead and jump into questions. So sitting to my left first, right, is Dr. Elizabeth Banks Carney, who is a clinical psychologist in Baltimore specializing in PTSD, childhood trauma, and critical incidents. She is a member of the National Association to Advance Fat Acceptance, and she is also a person who has self-identified as fat all her life. And she is active in the effort to increase understanding of the social, psychological, political, and medical issues faced by people living in higher weight bodies. So welcome, Dr. Banks. It's a pleasure to have you. Next, we have Rachel Milner, who is a psychologist and certified eating disorder specialist and supervisor. Rachel works with children and adolescents with eating disorders at the Eating Disorder Assessment and Treatment Program at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia here in the city. Dr. Milner also works with adults who have experienced eating disorders and those who are trying to heal from the impact of diet culture in her private practice. Next, we have Cassie Owens, who is a staff reporter for the Philadelphia Inquirer and Daily News, where she focuses on modern life and trends. In her current role for the newspapers, she often digs into culture and social dynamics, recently looking at how sizeism and body politics inform her ceaseless earrings obsession. So it will be very interesting to hear your take on these questions. And then last but not least, we have Dr. Charlie Seltzer. I hope I said that right. Okay. He is the only physician in the country who is both board certified in obesity medicine and certified by the American College of Sports Medicine as a clinical exercise physiologist. Driven by his past personal struggles with weight, Dr. Seltzer opened his own practice, which is the Dr. Charlie Seltzer MD Weight Loss Lifestyle and Fitness Solutions, which is located in Center City, where he teaches his patients the same principles that have allowed him to maintain weight loss for over 10 years. Okay, so that is a review of our panel. And now without further ado, I'm excited. I'm ready to get into the questions. Okay, and so the first question that I have for our panelists, is it possible, and we can kind of just go on the line, if you could just kind of tell the audience, tell us a little bit about your foray into the relationships with your body and body image, and kind of how did you come to the point where you are right now?
Want to start with me?
Yeah.
Well, I was pretty much born into the body I'm in right now. It was a smaller dimension at that point, but a large body. I experienced a great deal of discrimination, even in my own family, which was sort of the never too rich and too thin philosophy. And certainly at school, we would have called it bullying. It wasn't so much what they did to me as what they didn't allow me to be a part of. Affected dating, affected everything. And as an adult, I went into psychology. That had been my plan way back, and I went straight through. And that was one piece. I went to graduate school in New York City, which I think is one of the most weight stigmatizing cities on the planet. So I was very aware, even in my own program, of some of the stigma. But at that time, I went on my first significant diet. I was put on a diet when I was 11, but this was the first one I did myself. And I lost a fair amount of weight, and I was able to keep it off for 14 years. I think I got down to a size 12, which in New York was still considered morbidly obese, but I felt like a normal person walking down the street. So I had that experience for a while. And then due to a number of factors, and including the covariance of stigma, I was not able to maintain that. There were medical issues, there were just a number of issues that made that impossible to maintain. So somewhere back when I went on that first diet, I also discovered NAFA, which back in the day was the National Association to Advance Fat Acceptance, or Fat Americans, I think it was back then. And it was at that point largely not a health-related organization. That came later, but a liberate from oppression kind of organization. Let's live in the bodies we've got and stop apologizing for them. And they were coming up with some early research, health research and things like that, and it was pretty much confirming what I had experienced, which was I could go on a diet, I could lose weight for a while, it would plateau, I could maintain that plateau for a while, and I started thinking, wait a minute, I don't eat much differently than my friends over there, and probably healthier than many of them. I started questioning all the principles that had been ground into me just from my own experience. I wasn't taking it on the road, I wasn't an activist, I was just saying, wait a minute, these equations don't work for me. So I got very involved with that, and then from that, with NAPA, and then from that came an organization called A-HELP, which was, I can't remember what it stands for, but it was the first one to start to look at the health issues more objectively. And then ASDA, the Association of Science, Diversity, and Health, came along, and that's still around, and it's a wonderful, wonderful resource. I can't say enough about it. And then in the last, I would say, 10 years, it's taken off, along with our understanding of many other kinds of stigma. So it's been very, very liberating for me. As a psychologist and as a healthcare provider, I was able to kind of integrate that into some of my work, although I didn't specialize in it. Although it's not irrelevant to trauma. I don't mean that trauma causes people to gain weight either. I mean that living in a higher weight body is a form of trauma in and of itself. So that's kind of brings me up to today.
All right, thank you so much.
Hi everyone, it's good to be here and it's nice to see so many people in the room. Let's see, my relationship with food and my body has always been complicated. That's kind of the best word I can think of to describe it. There was a lot of focus on my weight from the time I was very young. And I don't think I ever had like an intuitive relationship with food. I think I developed an eating disorder as a young child and continued to struggle into my 20s. That struggle led me into different body sizes. I lived for quite some time in a higher weight body, and I lived for quite some time in a much lower weight body, and had this experience of sort of navigating the treatment world, both in a higher weight body and a lower weight body, and seeing how different those experiences were, how I was treated, how my access to care changed. You know, when I developed anorexia when I was in a larger body, the anorexia didn't change when I was in a smaller body. I had the same anorexia in both sizes, but the treatment providers around me all changed and my access to care suddenly became available, whereas I had been asking for help all along and being told, great job, you're losing weight, that's awesome. And I was saying, wait a minute, I'm in trouble here, like I think I have an eating disorder. And the response was, just keep losing weight, in fact, tell us how you're doing it. And when I was in a smaller body, all of a sudden it was, we're really concerned about you, we think you need help, you know, you have an eating disorder. And so suddenly care became available. So once I recovered, and I had already gone through graduate school, I was already a psychologist at that time, but when I recovered from my eating disorder, I wanted to help other people struggling in similar ways, and particularly wanted to address the weight bias in the eating disorder field. And so that's what a lot of my work has been around, is just calling out and naming that as a field we're doing harm, and that we're treating people in higher weight bodies differently than we're treating people in lower weight bodies, and that we need to take some ownership for that, and we need to address it. And so a lot of my work as a psychologist, both at CHOP and in private practice, is helping people to heal from the impact of weight stigma and to start identifying the problem outside of them versus internalizing the problem as something with their body. And so that's how I'm here.
Thank you.
So my relationship to all of this is very much that I'm still processing. When I first kind of started writing and first got into journalism, there wasn't the same sort of language for a lot of these issues that we're using now. It wasn't, and it wasn't even that long ago. I started my career in journalism around 2011, and it still wasn't common back then for people to just say like fat phobia, or to use terms like even body politics, or like sizeism was around, but still not necessarily in the context of trauma, like that, in the way that it's being more commonly discussed even at a panel like this one. And so as a writer, I often look at culture, I often look at fashion, and I, like for the earrings essay that I wrote, I did that as a personal essay because I thought that I wouldn't really find too many other sources like me. Like, I knew that it was a thing for me, but I didn't know that I could report it. And then as I started to work on the story and talk to different experts, I just was finding more and more people who had that same experience, where their experience with their bodies and with their self-perception and with discrimination as they were navigating the world affected so many other things, even beyond what you might think, including how they collect and gather accessories. And so in my work, I sort of make the effort to try to look at different lenses of identity, and it's sort of been a journey to sort of be like, wow, like, so often when we have conversations about identity, we don't talk about size, but it absolutely is part of the intersectional framework that we would talk about other identities with. So, yeah.
And lovely earrings, if I may say so.
Thanks so much for having me. I had a disrupted relationship with food for as long as I can remember, and I gained and lost the same 60 pounds probably 5 or 6 times. And I ended up opening a practice to help people really achieve what their goals are. It doesn't have to be weight loss, it can be improved fitness or whatever, because it's what I ended up doing, and I feel a lot more fulfilled and happy where I am now than I was before. I don't think it's directly related to my weight. Actually, it's not related to my weight. It's the relationship that I had with food that I've become better at handling that's made me a happy person.
Okay, all right. So thank you so much for all those answers. The next question that I have, since you've all kind of introduced yourselves and talked about what has brought you to this point, I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit to how your individual experiences speak to cultural ideas and attitudes towards body image.
So I think I maybe answered this a little bit when I was describing my experience. One of the things I think a lot about is all of the privileges that I hold and how hard it was for me to get treatment, and then thinking about people who have fewer privileges and how much more inaccessible treatment is. So I think that I'm very aware that I was in the field, knew what treatment was available, knew how to access it, and still in a higher weight body, it was unavailable. I think that, like I said earlier, changed when I was in a smaller body. So I feel like I kind of answered that earlier.
Okay.
I think that there's just a number of things that, I guess to rehash a little bit of what I was saying before, that we're starting to see more of now that I just didn't connect to my experiences prior. So I didn't ask questions about if I was sexually harassed, is there representation of plus size women in media when we're discussing sexual harassment? If I wasn't asking questions about, and I'm a journalist, you know what I mean? I wasn't asking myself as many questions as did my whole week shift because because this huge package of clothes that I got for a special milestone just didn't arrive in time because my accessibility to fashion is limited if we're talking about brick and mortar situations. And did that shift my mood this week, or like did I feel less prepared, and how hard do I prepare to, you know, try to show myself that I'm worthy of certain situations through clothes that sort of feel inaccessible to me. Or I just sort of feel like we're kind of like at the tip of the iceberg of having a lot more conversations about representation, because I think that we're having conversations about representing people in a lot of ways, but not always taking sides into that. And that for me, I'm only starting to really self-interrogate about that now as someone in media, so.
Yeah, I'm a little bit lost how to answer this question. You know, I always equated, like, I never felt personally that I was treated any differently when I was 240 pounds versus 170 pounds now. Now, it doesn't mean that I wasn't, I just never felt it, and certainly I can't speak for other people. For me, it was more of an issue of how I felt and how I want to look in the mirror and look a certain way. Maybe that's wrong to want to look that way, but I did. So most of what I've done has been driven, like, personally, because I didn't feel any difference the way people treated me from when I was the heaviest versus the lightest.
You said culture and
Cultural ideas and attitudes towards body image.
cultural ideas and attitudes. That's my little catchphrase for this question. I think the main point I want to make is that in very much in American culture, and I think it's global at this point, certainly any westernized culture, many individuals, organizations, governments, all kinds of systems believe that they have some proprietary right to tell me about my body. And that living with that permeable boundary, that at any time somebody with the full support of the culture can say to me, you're not healthy, you're not attractive, you must have been like this, you must have been like that. That is a horrible thing to live with. And then you throw in the intersectionality and the privilege issues, and I certainly had a lot of privilege, education being one of the greatest ones I've had. That makes it even more complex. There are people who could not be on this panel today that I wish we could hear from. But I think it is the cultural belief that all these different systems have a right to tell me about my body and not believe me when I talk about my body and consider me uncredible because obviously she's got an agenda for fat acceptance, right? It's very, very frustrating, and it definitely permeates to the level of identity.
Thank you. And if I could just kind of add a little bit, I think it's really interesting to hear the stories of 3 panelists who at least visibly identify as women, right? And that lived experience, like, versus the other lived experience of Dr. Seltzer, right? What does it mean? Okay, Charlie. But what does it mean to live in a male body, right? A male presenting body and be a higher weight? And does that have an impact on the way in which your body is perceived in culture, right? Like, what type of cultural ideals or attitudes are attached simply to women, female presenting bodies, right? And so just to kind of throw that out there a little bit, I think that's definitely interesting, something that I kind of picked up on. Okay, and so kind of moving on a little bit, I guess, one of the things that Cassie, you talked about, right? You kind of talked about the language, right? The language that we don't have available, that we didn't have available before, that we have available now. So I want to bring up some language a little bit. Fat activism. If I could have maybe the panelists here, I know that you are part of NAFA. You're part of Health at Every Size. Anybody else, feel free to chime in. But what is it, and how does it operate?
Well, fat activism is a good question. It's not one thing, because there's so many different people who embody it and live it and do it. But I've seen it evolve over 50 years. This summer is NAPA's 50th anniversary, which is pretty amazing. And I've seen it evolve from just unapologetically taking a piece of pumpkin pie at Thanksgiving to something much bigger and much more powerful. And I have seen it embodied by people like Marilyn Wan, who does disruptive activism and goes to settings where she can make her point. She does it beautifully. I've seen it evolve through research and through the opening of fat studies into either existing academic disciplines or and becoming one of its own. But I think that one of the most beautiful slivers of fat activism is what Sonia Renee Taylor took for her blog name. The body is not an apology. I think fat activism is starting with the idea that the body is not an apology. And let's get objective about what we know about fat. Let's take out the stigma and redo all the medical research and redo all the literature and let's look about what happens when we take some of this out. And that's, I think, what fat activism is. It's differently interpreted, but it's about claiming something.
Anybody like to add anything? Okay. All right, so kind of building off that a little bit, right? One of the things that you mentioned, Dr. Biggs, is kind of redoing medical research, right? Kind of going back and being objective about these things. And so I'm just wondering from the panelists, how do you negotiate those types of relationships in medical settings? And anybody feel free to hop in.
I think I might be in a different spot because people are coming to me in general because most of them do want to lose weight. So whatever brought them in, they're there to lose weight. So I think it's different than the experiences that you guys have. And just hearing it, like, it's troubling that happens, and maybe I'm naive for thinking that it doesn't happen because I never thought, I don't care if somebody gets an extra piece of pumpkin pie, like whatever. Even if they're coming to me, I'm going to tell them to eat it, just maybe take something out somewhere else that's less important. So I think that when it comes to like the purpose of the question, I think that my experience is going to be a lot less relevant. So I'll say that.
So I just wanted to chime in that, when people come into my office, they also often are wanting to lose weight. I think that in this culture, it's sort of almost impossible to do that, but I don't collude with it. And I don't perpetuate more weight stigma by saying, okay, I'm gonna help you to then lose weight. And I think that might be where the difference is,
And
not the desire when somebody wants
the first
it.
question I ask when someone comes in is, why do you want to lose weight? And I think if the answer is not appropriate, if someone's saying, I have diabetes and I know that a reduction in body fat is going to help my hemoglobin A1C or help me get off medicine, that's good. Or if somebody says, I want to look like whatever model, I would probably say, we're not the right fit.
Okay, but so I also wonder though, in very much like research that has been done for years, right, particularly on marginalized communities, sometimes things aren't necessarily as objective, right? So how do you, I'm just wondering, even if the argument is that they're coming to you for a medical condition and they are seeking to lose weight, are there other responses besides that? Like other responses to offer aside from weight loss to manage those things?
I'm not sure I understand.
Okay. So what I'm saying is that looking back, right, the research that has been done previously, and you can see research that's now coming out that kind of contradicts previous research that weight loss does lead to X, Y, and Z. So I'm saying that when people come to you seeking to lose weight, even if it's for a medical condition, are there times when you find yourself in a position to kind of refute that?
I think it depends on how you interpret the literature. I'm sure that you could all read the same studies and come up with different conclusions. I look at the bulk of the literature, and the way I interpret it is that excess body fat puts you at risk for a number of different conditions. And we're talking about visceral body fat, which is the body fat in the organs, which might not be on the outside. So I think what we're talking about is a societal problem is not what makes people unhealthy or puts them at risk for diabetes. If you look at a sumo wrestler, by body mass index standards, they're obese, but when you do a CT scan of them, you see there's no fat inside their organs, and if you look at their blood work, it's all really, really good. So when I say lose weight, we're really talking about losing organ fat. And that's the way I interpret the literature, not subcutaneous fat or body mass index, which I think is a useless tool.
Okay.
I'd like to speak, I'm sorry. I'd like to speak to the work of Dr. Linda Bacon, who was one of the first pioneers. Her PhD is in nutrition. She has some other degrees. And she wrote the book Health at Every Size. And now you hear health at every size everywhere you go. And it's been co-opted, but it actually belongs to her and her work. And she started pretty open-minded, but came to see that her most important work was she had two groups of people, and both had XYZ health status and XYZ weight, and one group was encouraged to lose weight, and the other and given support for that and education and everything they needed, and the other group was I may be oversimplifying, but the other group was focused on, let's look at what you eat and how you eat, and not in the old-fashioned way of calories or but leaving weight out of the equation completely. Let's give you a healthy relationship with food. Let's give you a healthy relationship with movement. Let's just not worry about weight for a while. And some of you are going to lose weight, and some of you aren't, but let's see if your health improves. And sure enough, the health of the group that focused on the actual activity level and nutrition and the metabolic markers, that got better and stayed better, and is now staying better. I think we're 10, 15 years out from her original work, and it's holding. The other group, some lost weight, some didn't, most weren't able to maintain it. So we get to the point where we have to ask, what's the point of weight loss? Why don't we rather than tell somebody, I'll make you healthy after you go out and lose weight, and we all still hear that in the offices of doctors and nurse practitioners and nurses. To this day, that is not gone. Rather than saying, I'll make you healthy after you lose some weight, or assessing all my health problems in terms of my weight, even if it's not relevant. I've had that with an ENT. Let's focus on how you're living your life. And so the health started to get better. And then, of course, the next thing that we noticed was the psychological health was getting better because people didn't hate their bodies. They didn't hate themselves. And that has a wonderful effect on the immune system and many aspects of health. So let's just take weight out of the equation. We'll do the same things, probably, that Charlie will do. But we don't care what the person weighs, and we're not going to weigh them. Let's just get them healthy. And maybe they'll lose weight, and maybe they won't, but that's not the point.
Yeah, I just also wanted to add that, I think that we have this idea that research or science is objective, and it is not. It is absolutely subjective. It is not value neutral. So I think we need to remember that. I don't think that we have research on people in marginalized identities. I don't think we have good research for people in larger bodies, because the only question that's ever asked is how can we get this group of people to lose weight? And when it doesn't work, we just ask the same question again and try to find a different way to do it. We don't ever branch out from that. So I don't think we know, because I don't think that the questions are being asked.
Absolutely, and I would recommend a YouTube on poodle science. It's the only one that you'll find if you do that search, and it's a wonderful little graphic about how if you take a mastiff and make it get down to the weight of a poodle, is it now healthier or not? And it looks at this question of, are people who lose weight, even if they can maintain it, are they healthier, or is there something else going on in their bodies that's related to this? And another thing that we have never really studied medically and in our research is, we're trying, but is what's the effect of dieting itself and weight cycling on bodies? And if that's a negative effect, and most people end up regaining weight, then if you take higher weight people and do medical research on them, the health problems you're finding may not be a function of their weight at all. It may have come from the other experiences that they've had, and there are many other kinds of experiences too.
It's also a chicken or the egg thing. People develop overweight problems because of issues. unhelpful stuff that makes them become overweight rather than the weight causing the health issues.
That's your.
I mean, I think that we do have pretty good evidence that weight is largely genetic. I mean, there's been twin studies done with people who were raised with their biological families and adoptive families, and the power of biology far outweighed environment. So I think that this idea that we're gonna pathologize people in larger bodies, we need to move away from that. I think that weight is complicated. There's probably all kinds of things that contribute to it, but we need to stop looking at it as though it's a problem to be solved.
Absolutely.
Okay. And so if I could just kind of add a little, maybe stir the pot a little bit. Oftentimes, I mean, I think when we look at different people, right? So, maybe you look at an Ashley Graham who's she's larger, right, than your average model. We on some level we say, okay, all right, Ashley Graham, that's what's in our mind, right? But more recently, Tess Holliday, right? She was featured on the cover of a magazine. Tess Holliday is currently at 26, right? And then people say, well, wait a minute, hold on, right? When we are, talking about larger bodies, where, the first thing people talk about is my 600-pound life, right? And those are the people that they refer to. So when we say take weight out of the equation, right? What is your answer to individuals who say, okay, but what about this person who's 600 pounds? Or what about this person who's a size 40?
I think it was Sonia Renee Taylor, you had mentioned earlier, says that the moment that you start to change the rules, the moment that you start to say, yeah, but, like, yes, but this person is X number of pounds, or yes, but this person has health conditions, or yeah, but whatever it is, that's where your bias lies, and that's where the work you still need to do is. So the rules don't change, no matter what size somebody is. We're still talking about liberating people in larger bodies. We're still talking about moving away from the focus on weight loss. And I think when you start to get uncomfortable, you need to look inward and do that inner work on where your own biases lie.
I would add that I think some of that comes from people's stigmatized reactions to those people. It's not really about worrying about their health. It's like, oh, but that's so big. I have a problem with that. And I would point people to it's called the Harvard Implicit Association Test. It's available online, and there are several different variables that you can take, but there's one on body size, and you can measure your own bias by taking this test online. It's a very standardized, it's a solid test. And your final result is not measured against any standard anywhere, but against your own belief going into the test, and how discrepant what you did is or isn't from where you thought you'd be going into the test. It's really, really excellent.
I was speaking to a researcher recently about like the idea of acceptable fatness. That like even when there's certain aspects to our appearance that are marginalized, that even those aspects might fall into more acceptable ranges. We don't just see that with size, we see that with colorism, we see that with hair texture, we see that with a lot of things that happens with body image and appearance and overall. And so there's a lot of even with images that are marketed to larger women, there's still so many ideas that fall within these narrowly inscribed boundaries of acceptable fatness. And that I think that Tess Holliday is often controversial because she's not an acceptable level of fat. A lot of plus size models, or actually let me rephrase that. There was a report several years ago that showed plus size models like wearing their fat suits. A lot of plus models might not fall like in a range where they actually can wear some of the clothes that's being marketed, and that so often like the push for people like Tess Holliday is that you might be shopping and might not have an accurate sense of how the clothes are going to fit, because there's so many models who might be a size 10 wearing a fat suit to make them a size 12 or 14. So I think that when we sort of like have these conversations about, oh, but look at this person, to Elizabeth and Rachel's points, it's often also a conversation about what society deems acceptable, even for communities that are already getting a lot of heat.
Okay. All right, so Cassie, right? Cassie, I want to make sure I get it right. Okay, so kind of following up on that a little bit, since you kind of brought up this matter of intersections, right? Mm-hmm. And talking about what is acceptable or what is ideal. Oftentimes when we talk about thin bodies, right, there's a certain type, even when we talk about thin bodies, there's a certain type of acceptable thin body, right? You have to be a certain race, you have to be a certain height, your hair color has to be a certain way, et cetera, et cetera. And so kind of delving a little bit into intersectionality, in your work, maybe coming away from your work, what strategies do you think can be used or should be used to consider the issues of intersections with body size, or like what you said, colorism, all of those different types of contexts?
I think that it takes asking more questions. So, I'm curious actually if this comes up in your work. I'm sure that it does, but like I've been a part of some like conversations in the offices that I've worked at on hiring, and I've never heard body image even brought up in a conversation on hiring discrimination. Mm-hmm. And I feel like there's just sort of like a long like litany of things where that can come up, where we can sort of consider like, are we not looking at certain aspects and certain experiences where people might be experiencing more trauma or being slighted because of their size, and and so often because like our depictions and the portrayals of people in different marginalized communities might fall into acceptable lenses or lanes. There's a lot of, I guess, stories that we just simply don't tell. So like, do we have, is there a lot of interest in showing the stories of someone who is a fat trans woman? Or are we more inclined to show the lifestyles and experiences of fat women who are white and moneyed? There's a lot of, I think, questions that we still have to ask.
Okay, and so I'm just wondering now that since body image, we find ourselves being more acceptance of body image, right? And maybe not telling the stories as much as we could, but you are seeing different types of stories kind of evolve. And so that also makes this community or this demographic marketable, right? And so I'm just wondering what your takes are on corporations that now are using, are we good?
No, it's buzzing.
It's buzzing? Okay.
It's just strange.
Okay. Just let me, if there's danger, somebody yells so I can, okay. All right, so I'm wondering, what is your take on, I guess, the, how we kind of see body image now being marketed, right? By body positivity or body acceptance, those things.
Well, I definitely want to hear from Cassie on this question. Absolutely, because I think intersectionality is a huge piece of this. But, am I going to wear my politics in public? I think that the more we capitalize some of these things, the farther they get from the truth. And it's turned out to be a moneymaker to get on board with health at every size and to call it that, and then we've had to push back, ASDA has had to push back and say, look, we've actually trademarked it. We didn't even want to trademark it. We didn't even want to be part of that system, but somebody convinced us to do it, and it's a good thing. And I think the elephant in the room corporation is Weight Watchers, which more and more is moving away from what it originally was and co-opting health at every size as its message, as if it's somehow the speaker for it or something. And they've even started to move away from weight loss. But they weren't part of the movement, they weren't part of the growth, and they've got some really important pieces missing about what this is about. They are, in the end, mostly about making money for Weight Watchers.
For business, definitely.
Yeah, and so, no, I think that the answer to the question is, it's horrible if we're gonna be co-opted by corporations or other things and take this message and try to run with it and sell it to people who can say, oh, I'm body positive, you know, I can't lose that last 5 pounds, but I'm learning to love myself anyway. Not that this is not against thin women or anything like that, but that we can't move away from the experience for people, and it is a little more difficult for women in higher weight bodies. We can't just say, oh, everybody should. I mean, we can, it's wonderful if everybody feels wonderful about their body, but don't lose our message in the process. Don't marginalize us.
I think the news site Wrapped, which recently shuttered, they did a lot of long form features on beauty and fashion, but they had a recent feature that was called Body Positivity is a Scam. And I kind of feel like even if you might not want to go that far, it's at the very least effective marketing. It's an effective marketing scheme. You get on YouTube and you watch Dove like show you lots of women who have hated themselves for years.
It's more mobile, and it's different. It's different for everybody. And some people will come in and they'll say, I want to run a marathon. It doesn't matter how much you weigh. It's how fast you run the marathon, if that's what you want to do. So, you know, everything's different. And I think that having the time to talk to an individual person about what their situation is, you know, it's a lot easier for me than to, you know, have to make policy or be able to, you know, say, you know, broad things. Like, I would love it if no one judged anybody. That'd be fantastic. I'm not smart enough to figure out how to make that happen, so I just try to do it myself.
I think that we need to recognize and remember that struggling, being unhappy, being depressed, whatever language we want to use, when you're walking through the world in a stigmatized body is a normal and expected response, and we need to stop pathologizing that. We need to start recognizing the problem outside of the individual and stop trying to change the person. I think it's really important for us to not be looking at somebody who's wanting to lose weight and identifying that there's something wrong with them. They're living in a culture that stigmatizes their body. Of course, that's the response. It's the culture that has the problem, not the individual person.
All right. So do we have any last remarks from the panelists before we move to take audience questions? Are you going to come back up so that you can? I'm not sure if there's a format to how questions should be addressed.
Oh, I think you can open the floor to
All right,
questions.
wow.
Because I think people have a lot of them.
All right. I like to say that this is now the question section of the panel. I wasn't sure if they wanted to record it, so I guess you'll ask the question and I'll repeat it so that it's on tape, or does it matter?
Anyone here can ask.
Oh, will they pick it up?
Would you pick up the question?
Okay, I'll repeat it. No problem. All
Actually,
right.
I'll start as long as you.
All right.
I want to ask Dr. Milner about her statement that lower weight bodies get different treatment than larger weight bodies. And could you be a little more specific about that? Is it that there's more psychological delving into the underpinning of anorexics than there are for people that are larger? Or what is it that you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the case across the board. Oh, sorry, did you want to repeat the question?
Well, she said a lot. So she's asking for you to expound on your previous point about how thinner people with anorexia get treated differently in their treatment than larger bodies.
So I first want to clarify and just say that not everybody with anorexia is in a smaller body, and not everybody with binge eating disorder is in a larger body. But I think that as a field, the research has been done primarily on anorexia, with very little research being done on binge eating disorder. And I think that the same exact behaviors that we diagnose as anorexia in someone who's in a smaller body, we praise and we recommend in people who are in larger bodies. And so I think that's where a lot of the difference happens. Like, we're not even recognizing the eating disorder symptoms in people in larger bodies.
Could you give an example of what you mean?
Yeah, so somebody who's in a larger body comes into a therapist's office or a physician's office and says that they're counting all of their calories, they're measuring their food, and they're exercising every day. For somebody who's in a smaller body, those behaviors are questioned and they're going to get screened for an eating disorder. And for somebody who's in a larger body, they're going to be praised and told, good job, you're doing exactly what we were asking you to do.
Yes.
Yeah, I would imagine, I guess that's because the smaller person maybe looks more sick or closer to death because they're really thin or maybe their bones are showing. But what I want to know is, for a heavier sized person who has anorexia, I mean, are there any cases of them dying from that with all the weight on them still?
The question is, are there any cases of a larger person dying from anorexia? Did I get it right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, there are. And in fact, for people who are in higher weight bodies with anorexia, typically they go a longer time before they get treatment. And so we know with anorexia, prognosis is much better if you receive early intervention. And so people who are starting out at a higher body weight and develop anorexia are sick longer before they get care. And when they do get care, they tend to be more medically compromised, even if they're at a higher weight at the point that they're getting care.
Thank you.
All right, all the way in the back here.
Thank you guys all. I learned a lot today. Is there any advice that you would give people being here, being a citizen of the world, to kind of create an acceptance and like a culture of acceptance, like any actions or any language that we can use with each other? Does that make sense?
So the question is, do you have any recommendations for people who are leaving here to create a culture of acceptance, or to use language that would fall under acceptance?
I think it's much like wanting to be an ally to any other group that you don't identify with, particularly for yourself. You want to start by listening to people that are in that group and trying to hear what they're trying to say and allowing them to say, this is how you can help me. And then being willing to live that as you go out.
Even I think among writers and researchers and activists in this community, there still is debate about even the word fat. There's some people who prefer plus or big or just a range of words because so many connotations associated with the word fat are terrible and stigmatizing, and some people argue ableist. So I think that whether you like to use the word fat or not, maybe just being conscious of the negative connotations that come with it in conversation, and sort of being mindful of sort of instances where it might be used to signify that someone might be slower or less attractive or less capable, that like even just having awareness about that, I think, is a place to start.
We could start with J.K. Rowling, couldn't we? She makes her villains all higher weight, or not all.
I'm thinking like maybe like first figure out why you're talking about it in the first place, like how the conversation got there, and then look at the context, because like I don't think that the word fat or thin for that matter, which I don't like either, you know, where did it come up from? Like nothing there, and then look at that situation and then try to evaluate how it came up and then figure out a better way or why it came up, and then look at the sources of it.
This is for Charlie. Is that okay? So I'm wondering, when you got your MD, was there any coursework that addressed weight? And if so, do you think that should still be a medical program?
It was such almost an afterthought, you know, and it's the traditional, you know, eat less, move more, which may be true, it may not be true, and that's a subject of a large area of debate. But it definitely, the stuff that I learned was mostly through personal experience and through a fellowship in obesity medicine, but more through my personal experience. And I think that a lot of what we're taught about nutrition in medical school is wrong. And I mean, you mentioned like diet, the word diet came up a bunch of times. Like you can't go on a diet. Like we know that diets don't work. So if you want to do whatever you want to do, if it's be healthy or whatever, you can't be on a diet.
So do you think like if a doctor is biased against a larger person, it didn't come so much from their education, but it's more of a
More
culture?
society. In the clinical stuff, yes, there are doctors who are. I remember feeling uncomfortable about the way doctors would talk about patients. So there's definitely a bias there. I think it comes across in their interactions with patients. And I've seen it how people who are by body mass index standards overweight or obese are treated differently, or blown off, or less likely to. Their symptoms less likely to be listened to, even if they're completely unrelated to their weight, because you know the doctors, and we see it, and it's horrible. It happens.
I think, just want to, going back to the word diet, that we need to remember that it doesn't matter what we call it. If the goal is weight loss, it's still a diet. So we can call it lifestyle change, we can call it getting healthier, we can name it whatever we want, but if weight loss is a goal, it's a diet.
Not all hands go up at once.
I have a question for Charlie. In your work with the different people that you see, regardless of their goals, with the advent of like MyFitnessPal and other like apps like that being so readily available, along with like fitness trackers, the Apple Watch, Fitbit, to what extent do you see those being useful or helpful, and then to what extent do those play out as harmful to the people that you're seeing?
Obviously, every patient is individualized. We do have a significant number of people who don't track on MyFitnessPal for one reason or another, but most of our patients do. And what normally comes out is people feel bad after they eat something. And I want to try to take that away, that if you have data about why you're doing what the context was, what the food is, we can figure it out and do it in a way that's not going to impact your life any more than it has to. So we do have people track. If people become obsessive about it or compulsive or whatever, we back off. But I haven't really seen that be the case. I mean, you had people who have considerable binge eating disorders by the DSM criteria who find MyFitnessPal almost free, because one of the things about binge eating disorder is you're not in control. And when you put the food down, you're in control. And once you start looking at it, you have to be perfect in one way. Or let's just record it, get some data, and figure out what's going on here. You know, it tends to be more helpful than harmful. But again, there are situations where it's just not a good idea for somebody to use.
Yes.
I'm curious about the perspective healthcare should take. I mean, you got this whole issue of population health, which touts that diet and exercise and whatnot is good for the population. Or you have the healthcare organization that makes money on folks coming in for weight loss, whatever. How do they still continue to provide services, yet reconcile that we're now talking about body image as opposed to their BMI? You know, I mean, healthcare is driven by the BMIs.
And what's interesting is, at least in my experience in the clinical setting, is that doctors aren't addressing weight. They're addressing the symptoms that are arguably associated, or the signs arguably associated with excess body fat, like insulin resistance, or high cholesterol, or heart disease, or high blood pressure. So they're using a lot of drugs to treat, and I'm not saying that obesity is the problem. I think we had talked about that before, as far as risk factors, but there is a large body of literature that says that people who carry excess body fat are going to be more prone to chronic medical illness. But at the same time, medicine's not addressing that. In fact, we don't take insurance because they won't reimburse weight visits. You know, the insurance company, Blue Cross, pays $20 once a year for one meeting with a nutritionist, and it's just not going to do anything. So I think that's a fundamental problem.
I would say, let's get the research right, first of all. And the research has not been objective for so long. It's starting to be objective, but it's still hard for in shifting the paradigm from weight to health at every size. It's still hard to get those things published. They have to be 1,000 times better articles than the mainstream thought articles that get published. So it's not just a question of doing better research, but the culture has to accept that research. And so now we come full circle back around to weight stigma in the culture. It's very complicated. You have to intervene at many different places. But first, let's get the research right.
Yes.
Also, this is for Dr. Charles. So as a physician, so a lot of us here are future physicians. How do you balance between the data that says obesity and versus the talk that we're having now of loving one's body image? How do you balance that in terms of health and things of that nature when you do see a patient?
Can you repeat it and then I'll
That's a great
repeat
question.
Because I can't. Everybody didn't hear it.
So essentially, we read a lot of data. A lot of us in my program of future physicians, and we are always, based on the data we have read, we are taught that obesity is wrong in terms of risk factors, things of that nature, with childhood obesity in America being one of the highest. I'm saying that as a physician, how do you go about addressing that? One should love themselves and not hate themselves based on their size, but also understand that the risk factors that are associated with the different BMI sizes. So how do you go about addressing that to your patients?
It's almost like, impossible to balance it. You just do your best to see where they're coming from and what they want. And a lot of weight comes indirectly from behaviors that people find are destructive, yet they do anyway. Like, people don't like when they binge eat. And if someone's binge eating, the goal should not be to have them lose weight. It should be to address why they're binge eating and get that under better control. And then you can, and if weight loss is a byproduct, great. And if not, it really depends again if the individual wants to lose weight or not, or if they buy into the research that says that obesity creates a bunch of risk factors, which I happen to believe, but not everybody does. And that's open to interpretation. Everybody is entitled to their own opinion.
We're just not sure if it's the obesity creating the risk factor, or the history of dieting, or the history of weight cycling. We know that these associations exist, but we're not sure that they're coming from where you might think that they're coming from.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like, I don't think anybody knows anything absolutely. So you look at the person, and when you look at least an individual, you can look at lab markers that are, you can look at cholesterol, you can look at hemoglobin A1C, which is the average 3 months of your blood sugar, and you can see if somebody is improving, whether their weight comes off or not. And that's probably a better indication of health, that it is a better indication of health than what someone's body mass index is. Again, you go back to the sumo wrestlers. And then on the opposite side, there are a population of people called normal weight metabolically obese people who have blood work that looks like people say somebody's carrying a lot of excess body fat is. And again, it comes down to that visceral fat, that organ fat, which is the most important thing, but it's also something you can't see. So there's almost like two different things going on.
I think we also need to remember as we're having this conversation that even if we want to go down this path that somehow it's about the weight, we don't have any way over 2 to 5 year follow-up for people to sustain weight loss. Over 95% of people who lose weight are going to gain it back, and 1/3 to 2/3 are going to gain back more than they lost. So we don't have, there's not one large-scale study that successfully had people lose weight and keep it off. So I think when we're having the conversation, we need to remember that.
And not to be a shameless marketer, but my program is different. Our patients do tend to keep their weight off, but it is different. I agree with you. And I would say that if 95% of diets fail, 100% of them fail because the people who succeed are going to be outliers and they're going to be successful at anything. So I think that the approach, if everyone decides that we do want to try to decrease the rate of obesity, it can't be done the way it's done before. It can't be with diets, and I don't think it can be done with medications by itself either.
I want to make the point that BMI is a ridiculous statistic that was developed by a Danish statistician for aggregate data to use to do population studies. And what's wonderful about it in this day and age is that now that we have coming from CMS, the Medicare people, doctors have so many parameters that they have to report just to get reimbursed. I mean, we think this is better. We're getting all this data. We love big data. So I'm sure one of the reasons Charlie doesn't take insurance is because once you start taking insurance, it wants to tell you how to do your job. But BMI is easy to figure out. It's one of those parameters you can figure it out, and if the person's weight doesn't change, you can send it in every time you have a visit, and it just looks so wonderful, and it feels so good, and it's like data, but it's really not.
And it doesn't mean anything.
It doesn't
Nothing.
mean
When
anything.
applied, absolutely. It's a useless tool. But insurance reimburses for it, so you put it down, and you make diagnoses based on that. I mean, obesity by itself is based on body mass index. So you can argue that the term obesity is irrelevant if body mass index is irrelevant.
On the question of diet, what if you eat fruit for dessert as opposed to eating chocolate cake for dessert? Is that a diet? You are used to eating chocolate cake and you change to fruit. Is that a diet? And certainly you'll lose weight if you eat fruit for dessert instead of chocolate cake. Just asking.
I mean, I think that it depends on what the reasons are. You know, if you're making that change with the intention of losing weight, then it's a diet. And you're gonna feel restricted, and we know that whether there's actual restriction or a feeling of being restricted, that's gonna lead to binging. You know, we were talking earlier about binge eating disorder. I conceptualize binge eating disorder as a restrictive eating disorder because I've never met somebody with binge eating disorder who doesn't restrict. It's the restriction that leads to the binging and to that feeling of being out of control. And so I think if you're making those changes and it's because you're wanting to lose weight, it's a diet. If you're making, we can make changes for all kinds of other reasons, and it could be changes in the way that we're eating that has nothing to do with our weight. That would not necessarily be a diet.
I was just gonna say, in that case, I tell my patients to eat the chocolate cake. Take one little slice off before you eat it, throw it away, and when you come back to it, you'll never notice that it was gone. And then you're still eating the chocolate cake, and maybe you'll save 30 calories. If it turns out that the calorie equation is right, then over the course of a long time, without noticing anything, you'll...
But that's contradicting what Dr. Milner
Yes.
said. But my thought is that if you eat enough fruit for dessert, you develop a taste for fruit, and you don't want the chocolate cake anymore. I really do think that's true. But you have to do it over a long period of time.
It's not true.
You still want the chocolate cake.
No, but you like it less. It's like meat. When you stop eating meat for a while, you don't crave it.
I stopped eating sugar as a challenge for 2 months. All I wanted to do was eat sugar that entire 2 months. And the second that 2 months were taken out,
Don't eat that it's a diet. If my 110-pound
I've
daughter
heard words
eats
today
half
like
and doesn't eat the other half, it's because she just didn't feel like eating the other half of the candy bar because she
fat
doesn't care.
phobia, body politics, sizeism, fat activism. My question to you guys on the panel, and I think this is great. What are you doing daily with your research, with your lives, with your practices, with your writing, to promote diversity, fat positivity, body acceptance, and social change? What are you doing?
Well, I drove here from Baltimore today. Mine is a quiet kind of activism now. When I was younger, it was more out front, but I practice it in my practice, and I have a general psychotherapy practice with a specialty in trauma that I give all kinds of people. I live what I believe, and if we come up to a place where one of my clients is saying, I want to lose weight, I want to do a lot of talking about that and make sure that she's aware of the other paradigms. And I still won't help her to lose weight. I'll say, okay, if you want to find a nutritionist that will help you with that, I'm not going to, obviously it's not my place to stop that, but I practice what I preach. As I've gotten more self-assured, I wear what I want to wear, I eat what I want to eat, and I do it in public. I don't apologize for my body.
Right on.
Mine is sort of at this point, kind of an individual. I'm very involved with some of these organizations, and certainly NAFA, and I try to help them when I can. But it is mostly for me at this point an individual activism. I'm a little older now than I used to be.
I think for me it varies depending on the day, depending on my capacity on any given day. Sometimes it's more of what I'm doing in my day-to-day life. A lot of times now, because what I do full-time is see patients, and a lot, because I'm at CHOP, I primarily see kids and adolescents who are struggling with eating disorders. So every single day I'm planting seeds. I know that they maybe aren't in a place yet to fully internalize these messages, but I'm putting the messages out there. I'm introducing the concept of fat acceptance. I'm introducing the concepts of health at every size. And I'm doing it every day, every session. You know, I also think as a psychologist, it's not enough for me to just do what I do in my office. Like if I'm working with individual clients but not working for social change, I'm not really then living what I'm preaching in my office. So I show up at events like this, I speak up when I'm able to, and I try to name the oppression when it's happening.
So the person who asked the question is my mother. So Mom, I've been working on
We love you both.
There's a lot of studies that have been coming out in recent years, and not just studies, but internal audits that journalists have been doing and newsrooms have been doing that are pretty scary, that show that a lot of reporting has sourcing that skews towards men constantly, but definitely white men, especially if we're talking about experts. So like over recent months, I've just been trying to make a conscious effort to interview more women. And more recently, I've been trying to make a conscious effort to get more particular than that, and including issues of size and including sources of different body types. So
I was really hoping something was going to come to me. I probably don't do enough, other than just trying to create a positive atmosphere in my office and help people accept who they are and then try to better themselves in the way that they want to. I don't do much. Sorry.
Well, you're here and you heard us, so
Yes.
maybe you'll do something different going forward.
That'd be the goal.
And with that,
The one idea that kind of really stuck out with me was Dr. Carney's idea about government systems telling you things about your body and what to do with them. So first, can you give sort of examples just of what you've seen and how these can be harmful? And then the one that immediately popped into my mind was like the soda tax that we see going around a lot in cities across the country, and what that kind of, the intersection here with politics, and how we can kind of hopefully bridge that gap into body positivity, even though the government systems are telling you that you can't eat or drink gallons of soda at one time because it's not good for you.
That is such a good question. I'm not going to have a really coherent answer,
That's
but I
okay.
will babble a little bit. Let's
That's
see if I can
okay.
answer some of it. We're going to quickly get into access, and that quickly gets us into intersectionality and what other people can get or can't get. In terms of the soda thing, what are the other options? What is it cool to be seen drinking or not? I mean, that's valid, right? If everybody says you're not cool if you're, drinking water and they're drinking Coke, that matters to an adolescent. I think what we see at governmental levels really reflects a lot of the biases of the people who have the power at that point. And I would say, for example, my undergraduate degree was from Johns Hopkins, and Bloomberg is also a graduate of Johns Hopkins and a great fan, and he's given them tremendous amount of money, and they renamed their School of Public Health after him. But Bloomberg is fat phobic, and now everything coming out of there, not everything, I'm elaborating a little bit, but Bloomberg, the public health school at Hopkins has taken a turn towards being fat phobic, and it's only a minority of people that are looking at health at every size and weight stigma. So you've got an individual there with a lot of money and a lot of power who's affecting us at government level. We have a president right now who is fat phobic and fat hypocritical and really conflicted about body image. And that's just affecting so many things. And he doesn't hesitate to yell out his fat hatred at times. So I think we keep coming back to the cultural and the systemic. I don't think that we can really answer that question until we can look at what the culture does to affect individuals in terms of fat acceptance.
We have time for maybe two or three more questions. Yes.
So what would you suggest for dietitians who want to help their patients be body acceptance and healthy at every size, but also keep in mind that patients do come in and they want to keep their diabetes under control or lose weight?
Is that more for you or me, or?
Sure. I mean, I can start. And then,
Yeah.
I think one thing to remember is that you can help people improve their health without focusing on weight loss at all. So those things don't have to get connected, and I think that's the thing to keep in mind. I think that if you're a dietitian learning from Health at Every Size and non-diet dietitians, looking for dietitians who identify as fat positive and learning from them, I know from my dietitian friends that those are not things you're going to learn in school, that you actually have to seek out more training and from specialists to develop that expertise. But I think really having the goal of being a Health at Every Size or fat positive dietitian and then learning from people who are doing that work.
What she said. And there is, by the way, a Facebook page for Health at Every Size therapists and nutritionists, which you might want to look into.
Is there one more? All right.
This is more of an observation. I think the increase in, body image or things that we all live with every day. 50 years ago, when Alfred Hitchcock did his TV show, they showed a little silhouette, a quick silhouette of him, and at the time everybody thought, oh my God, he's just enormous. Well, you look at that silhouette today, and that's my next door neighbor. That's my husband. So it's, suddenly everybody is getting bigger, as a rule. I wonder what part, you go into a hardware store, there are candy bars at the checkout counter. You go into the grocery store, there are 15 flavors of Oreo cookies. And, the healthier foods are sort of out on the edges. And I just wonder how much that goes into things and, companies, big food corporations are sort of pushing this on everybody. It's like in Alice, eat me, eat me, eat me. Every place you go, that's what's going on. So they push the food and then make fun of it. And like Cassie was saying, fat models are a size 14. I haven't seen 14 since I was in my 20s. And that's fat? It's just such a mess that we're all in. Where they seem to have put us in. What are you supposed to do?
Huh. And I think if we started tapping it out,
Oh, I know.
we'd be here way past 5. All right, so this will be the last question.
Yeah. Still formulating the question in my head, but this is the last chance to ask it. So, we're talking about changes in mindset and belief a lot of the time. And these things are very habitual and deeply ingrained. I was wondering if in your work, you've noticed or observed any ways to induce receptiveness to change in someone else or maybe in yourself? Because I feel like there are different stages at which people might be more receptive to change.
So the question is, if you've noticed in any of your work that you have found a way to reduce receptiveness to change, right? So dealing with the idea that weight bias, weight stigma is kind of cultural, and it's rooted in how we believe and our ideologies. Have you found any way to kind of reduce? Induce. I'm sorry. Thank you for helping me. Induce. Yeah, because that makes sense now. Induce to induce receptiveness in your own work.
Yeah, I think as a psychologist, looking at sort of the stages of change or readiness for change and kind of identifying where people are, and then using what's called motivational interviewing as a tool that can help promote change. Both of those are like big topics that we don't really have time for, but those are the tools that I use in my work.
I would agree, and I think it helps a lot that this conversation is getting larger and in the media as well. We're beginning to hit a critical mass where most people have heard something about health at every size and are open to it as a controversy as opposed to just a ridiculous idea. So I think that kind of growing awareness certainly makes it easier.
I'm not sure. I mean, there's like when I wrote the essay on earrings, I wasn't expecting it to do like particularly well, and thought that maybe there would be other, fat women, other big girls who loved it, and there were just so many people who were like, of all sizes. Like, I related to this so much, and I think that like I'm still figuring out like how to try to be specific and how to be clear about things being specific while having this experience of people receiving it like this is something universal. Because often when, and this is something that's happened with other pieces that I've done on other issues of marginalized identities, but often, like, if it's been effective, people have just been like, yeah, like, this is something that I felt really deeply on a human level. So, honestly, I'm still working on that.
And if I could just chime in and add a little bit, one of the people on my dissertation committee, she also studied stigma, and what she found in research was that oftentimes trying to change opinions on large scales, there is a sense that it's not always effective, right? So we kind of wind up in these chambers when we're just sharing ideas within one another. Like, there's a reason why everybody's here and why they agree, and we join Facebook groups that agree with us, and we watch the news that agree with us, and at the end of the day, we just kind of preach to the choir. But what they were able to actually find in their research in regards to stigma is that changing stigma happened or was most effective when you were having conversations with people one-on-one. So me sitting down with you, telling you about fat phobia, kind of helps change your mindset. It kind of helps change the receptiveness that you may have, or induce the receptiveness that you may have, because it's more intimate, it's more personal. So I think there are different levels to sharing messages and how receptive different audiences are based on the type of group settings or the type of the medium of the message that you share. All right. And we should all give ourselves a hand. So this concludes our panel. I'd like to thank all the panelists once again for coming out. I'd like to thank Drexel and the Pennoni Honors College for sponsoring this talk. I don't know where my host went. I'm not sure. Okay. Thank you to Erica for having us and contacting us. And I hope that this was insightful. I hope it was useful. I hope that everyone feels like they can take something away from this panel and kind of grow from it. So thank you once again. I hope everybody has a great night. And I'm going to go get a cheesesteak because they don't make them the same way in Jersey.
Is anyone taking the shuttle back? Yes. I just have to go to the loop to the move.